Welcome to another Downtime episode where I talk about my experience using the BECMI rules of D&D, which was the 1980s and 90s version of D&D, to play the Gunderholfen Mega Dungeon solo. Mostly I wanted to cover a few things that came up through comments to these videos. One of the coolest things about this experience has been the feedback that I've been getting from people who know the rules cyclopedia really well, know old school play really well, and can help fill me in on a lot of what's going on. So the first thing I wanted to mention was this great comment I got from a username that I don't really want to try to pronounce. I don't know if it's meant to be pronounced. Metis. I apologize for any horrible pronunciation of that. This person commented, made this great statement that in old school games, combat is a fail state. And what they said was, which simply means that is where you lose control and open yourself via random rolls to degrees of failure. So tactical play demands rigging it to your advantage when you have to engage. This was one of those comments where, I kind of felt it. I kind of knew that's what was going on. And the comment made it all snap together for me. That anytime I engage in combat, when I have characters who have less than the average roll of a D6 for hit points, anyone can drop with one successful hit. So the key is really rigging that to my own advantage. Thinking of it as a fail state just opened up my mind of if you get to that point, it's a problem. What I have felt from that, though, is there's a demand on me to make encounters more creative and to figure out a way around things, which is challenging in a way for a solo player that I don't sense it when I am running games, old school games, for my friends, and I am the dungeon master. They do come up with creative solutions all the time. And so I wonder what the stumbling block is for me as a solo player. Why sometimes do I just go in there sword swinging? And sometimes it's a numbers game. I think I've got enough characters and retainers to do damage and get the upper hand, but the rolls don't go my way and a couple of them get dropped. So that's something I'm looking at. And then I see, definitely because I have this interesting vantage point of editing every session I play, I'm doing a post-game analysis. One thing that's become clear to me over and over is where I'm making uncreative decisions and failing my characters. There is a great moment in session 9 where I kind of remember that I have this golem with me and I think, I've got the most creative idea. This golem is going to go up to this prison door that has a window slot in it and knock and get the hobgoblin's attention. When it does, and they do a little bit of damage to the golem, I have the golem run back to the stairs, retrieve some burning oil, and throw one flask of oil in there. I don't know why, in the moment, I didn't think to just do that every round. Just have the golem run back. Faqual puts a flask of burning oil in its hand, it runs up, pitches it in the room. With splash damage, if I were counting that, I would certainly have rigged this to my advantage. The hobgoblins probably would have run out the other side, and I could have gone in there, hopefully saved the prisoner before I burned him up. But it was a moment where only, in the moment I thought I had a creative solution, and only through the gift of editing that and having to look back at it did I realize, nope, I went in and triggered the combat fail state all over again because I had all my characters run in that door and start a fight with the hobgoblins just because one of them was burning and one of them was distracted by that. So I know getting reminded of these things in the comments helps me know, I'm not quite there yet, which is fine. I want the experience of sort of learning all this. I want to experience it all for the first time. But I do want to say that there are a couple things throwing me off here. One I had noted in a really early Downtime video, which was Gunderholfen is really combat heavy. And I actually don't have experience in my real world, group OSR game where we're using old school essentials. I don't have an example yet of us running into a combat heavy dungeon. Every dungeon I've taken them into or adventure that I've taken them through has allowed for a lot more creative back and forth as in the way that they can plan around dangers and combat and find creative solutions in a way that I can't in Gunderholfen. So I'm willing to say a lot of that is my own responsibility, and I'm not thinking creatively enough. I'm sort of under the pressure of having a camera recording all this as I try to figure it out. But part of it is simply the design of the dungeon. And one of those examples is here in level 1B, which was the goblin lair of the first level. My characters, as they come up to this portcullis, designation in the book is that as soon as you fire on those goblins, they are going to lower that portcullis, and then it is simply locked. And there's a lever on the inside of it, but it is locked. And, my interpretation of that was once that comes down, there's no getting in. So in other words, the design of this dungeon matters for how you approach it, because you're almost in a position where you have to bum rush these goblins, get through that portcullis so that you can keep it open. But you're not going to know that, of course, until you first approach it, shoot one of them with an arrow, and they drop the portcullis on you. As my characters found out, we had to go in and raise it. We had a really harrowing escape one time where they had lowered it, and we were trying to fix the lock over and over, just to raise it so we could escape a whole bunch of goblins pursuing us up this passageway. Every entrance to Gunderhofen is sort of designed that way. If you saw the very first episode of my solo playthrough, my characters approached this hobgoblin lair first, which similarly had a portcullis and a couple of hobgoblins hanging around outside it. Even though we tried our hide in the shadows and moved silently, we hid behind these rocks. We thought we had this good distraction plan to get one or both of the hobgoblins out of the way, but there was simply no way around engaging them. I mean, I guess I could have played it off, like I could have continued distractions, tried to lure them out, but that's a little bit hard as a solo player to do that. I'm not trying to criticize the dungeon because of that, but I think the design of a dungeon factors into how you approach it. And a lot of Gunderhofen is designed around combat. Similarly, the kobold lair, the kobolds are actually, I think I had them waiting outside this room and they fled in, the outside guards. But the way the encounter is written is they're all in this room. So if you think of a party coming to level 1A as a natural first entrance for level 1 party, they're first going to have to open this door and then roll for surprise on these kobolds, because there's going to be, I think it's at least 3 kobolds standing in that room ready to attack. And the instructions also say as soon as a fight breaks out, they're going to try to run out this way and jump this pit trap, another waiting device to kill a player. I understand that there's parlay, there's ways to bribe and trap creatures. There's flasks of oil to throw in there and catch them on fire, or there's food to lure them out. But I simply want to make the point that a lot of this dungeon is designed around fighting those creatures, which I can easily compare and contrast to the incandescent grottos, where kobolds are one of the first things that you are likely to encounter in that dungeon, and they are peacefully going about their business, almost don't require a reaction roll because the dungeon specifies what they're doing. But of course, if you approached aggressively, if you surprised them, it would be a cause for a reaction roll. But there's a way around that encounter, and my players have certainly found ways around that encounter other than fighting those kobolds right in the entrance of that dungeon. Whereas in Gunderhofen, I feel like engagement is almost prescribed. All that saying, I would go back to something I learned that I said in one of my early downtimes, which is if I were running Gunderhofen with players using old school D&D rules, I would tell them, you're going to go through some PCs. I would have the NPCs and quest givers in Longfelt explicitly explain, this is an extremely dangerous dungeon. That's why people aren't constantly crawling all over it, searching for its treasure. Nobody wants to lose their friends going through this. So if you go, be prepared to lose friends over and over. Think about that camp outside. Think about the secondary characters you're going to have ready to go and run in once you lose people, because you are bound to lose people. I think with that approach, which is certainly like the approach I've kind of adapted to over the last couple of sessions, I think you're going to go in and have a little bit more fun. And one of the main reasons for me approaching it that way and saying, let's put this onus on the players, is because I, as a DM, don't want to have to do more prep work. And certainly as a solo player, I don't want to have to read ahead and start figuring out how to adjust encounters. I don't want to have to think, if I want to do a solo playthrough of Gunderhofen, I need to think about going in at level 2 or bringing this many retainers or whatever I'm doing to mitigate the danger of the dungeon. I just kind of want to roll in as low prep as possible. And maybe that's me asking too much of just kind of any dungeon, but that's where I am right now. I want to play solo games using old school rules because I want to learn the rules and I want to learn the dungeons so that I have this insight going forward when I may take other players through it. That brings me to another thing that's come up in several different comments, which is the retainer thing, which I held off on for so many sessions, hiring retainers. I think I said in one of my last videos where I explained my reticence around this, that when I look at pages like this with all this wall of text, I kind of go, what's the important stuff for me to understand out of here? I have certainly read straight through this, but not understood the precise rules around retainers, which is to say retainers and mercenaries are different things. So as far as I understand, retainers are just NPCs, run by the DM, where you roll up a character sheet and that's your NPC retainer is just a full character. Here's a cleric that's your retainer or something like that. And a mercenary is probably something specifically designed for mass combat or some kind of assault, because mercenaries do not normally go on dungeon adventures and will only participate in certain wilderness adventures, fighting other armies, clearing monsters around a castle, defending the castle, etc. Because I didn't have sort of a price list for the retainers, and because it doesn't make sense as a solo player to conduct interviews with retainers and role play out all of that job offer and acceptance, I kind of skipped right to the mercenaries and thought, well, that's what I'm doing. As I looked at the wall of text, I went, yeah, I need to just hire, or what does it cost to hire retainers, thinking mercenaries, what does it cost to hire mercenaries, thinking of them as just retainers? I did somehow in my brain understand that specialists were something separate to be hired, probably because a table here called out that there's a separate cost per month. Anyway, this is how BECMI lays out retainers, mercenaries, specialists. And I understand players who've played this for a long time, it probably just naturally makes sense. But coming into it from modern games, whether that's 5th edition or it's story games, as I've come into this to old school play, this doesn't tell me, hey, to hire a retainer, you're going to pay this much per day, per class, etc. There's these specific things saying retainers do not normally get a share of treasure. Just give me a table. Just tell me what retainers cost in general. Level 1 cleric costs this much and they will go into a dungeon with you. Just be really clear. And as a contrast to that, I thought it was worth showing how Old School Essentials does it. And Old School Essentials, I think, is very clear and much easier to read. Retainers is a huge heading here. Mercenaries is on a completely separate page. All the costs for the mercenaries are right there. Wages and upkeep is its own little section to explain, here's the standard rate. Here's what upkeep is going to cost. Applicant reactions. It all makes so much more sense to me in this layout than the way that old BECMI did in the 90s, where it was up to you to kind of infer how you were supposed to do that. And I mentioned this all not to criticize BECMI, a 30-something-year-old game, versus Old School Essentials, which in many ways has hacked the game into something better using its core mechanics. I mention it because this helps me understand when I was a kid and I had those red and blue books and I couldn't find anyone to play it with because I didn't understand the game. That's why. It just wasn't explained in a very clear way. And it doesn't matter that 40 years has passed since I had those books, or almost 40 years. It is not any clearer to read this as an adult of normal age than it was as a child. I don't think I ever got to the retainers and mercenaries when I was a child, but regardless, this is the kind of thing to expect from BECMI. It's still making assumptions about what you know about the game before you get into the rules. I don't know that bums me out, but it makes me feel like, as written, this is kind of unplayable, and it makes Old School Essentials that much more palatable. To think, yeah, when I want to figure out retainers, why don't I just flip to this 2-page spread, which says everything I need to know about retainers? So, that said, I think as a solo player, there's this further conundrum. What I did was, according to cost and specificity here, I hired mercenaries. Mercenaries don't go into dungeons. Great. That's understood. But as a solo player, how do you hire retainers in a way that you're not just adding more character sheets to the things that you're going to manage? For that reason, I think my solution of having sort of the main party on one sheet and then having the hirelings on another sheet makes sense. I think there's some things I want to change to the hireling sheet. I want to take out the individual XP. I want the hirelings to level up at the rate probably of the party. I want the hirelings to be basically the fighters, and the specialists, in other words, like the clerics, magic users, and thieves, those are going to be the main party. The hirelings, retainers, mercenaries, whatever I want to call them, they're just going to be fighters that are there to like lend me a little bit more firepower and help me knock down doors, things like that. But I like this story that kind of develops out of having the hirelings be their own unit, their own division. Irwin has passed on. Grebe is going to take over the Dobahai division and run that. And I'm going to reorient this as I go into the next session. Yeah, so that it's a single unit that I can role play kind of as a unit. And then I can role play these 4 characters as 4 different characters with different personalities and sort of push-pull the story that way. I think that's kind of everything that's been on my mind over these last couple of sessions as I've gone through this. I also think that there is going to be a particular scene that I know, for example, that Talira and Virago, a dynamic between them shifted in session 9. And in session 10, we're going to see Talira take a little bit more control of the party in a certain way and set the direction for the party in a way that I think incorporates all this feedback and makes it part of the story and gives me a little bit more direction when my characters go back into the Hobgoblin lair and find whatever horrible things are on the other side of this prison cell.